How many of us have read Alice in Wonderland? And how many of us heard the character of the dodo bird? It is said that the author Charles Dodson wrote this character as a caricature of his own personality, of himself, because he used to stammer and he used to say his name as Dodo Dodson, and that's why he thought it is the fittest to have a bird to impersonate him. Now, this dodo bird has been extinct from the world in 17th century during Dutch invasion in Africa. There are many species has been extinct like that, and many species are there now who are critically endangered and who are on the verge of extinction. We as a world needs to preserve them. We need to protect them for our own benefit, because they are the part of the ecosystem, and if they get extinct, the day is not far away when we human will only stay in this world on the verge of being extinct. There are many countries which are taking action for that. Different acts and policies has been taken into account for the conservation of the wildlife. In India, there has been many actions, many acts and policies has been taken. One of the two most important policies are Wildlife Protection Act 1972 and National Wildlife Action Plan, which are the topic of today's discussion. Hello, my name is Avipriya Maitra, and a warm welcome to all of you on today's presentation. Let's get started. Before we talk about the Wildlife Protection Act, first we have to understand what do we mean by wildlife. Wildlife actually means, traditionally, the undomesticated animals, but now it has come to include all the organisms that grow or live wild in an area without being introduced by the human, without any kind of human intervention and interference. Wildlife can be found in all ecosystems, and therefore it's a very important part of our environment, and that is why it's important to preserve them as well. If we see how the wildlife concept came, this wildlife conservation movement can be traced back to John Evelyn's work Sylvia, which was presented as a paper to the Royal Society in 1662. As far India is concerned, US Environment Attorney and author Bruce Rich has said, wildlife conservation, particularly protection of elephants in India, dates back to the time of Kautilya and Chandragupta Maurya. He has also claimed that it was prevalent during the time of Ashoka as well, and the people who used to disobey the rules, they used to be punished severely. But if we talk about the chronological order in wildlife protection, we would divide it into two parts, which is talking about the modern history, modern Indian history. The first part was, of course, the British government time, and the second part is after independence. During the British government, the first law of protection of wildlife was passed. The year was 1887. The name of the act was Wild Birds Protection Act. This law made it illegal to possess, sell wild birds, which were either captured or killed. But it was not a full-fledged act, because it was only considering the protection and conservation of the wild birds. The other species were not taken into the account. The second law came in 1912, called Wild Birds and Animals Protection Act, and that was amended in 1935. That was the last act during British government. During independence in 1960, the issue of protection of wildlife and prevention of certain species from becoming extinct came to the fore, and because of which the Wildlife Protection Act was passed in 1972. In that act, wildlife protection and conservation, forest and wildlife conservation was considered as an element of the state list, and it was a responsibility for the states to take action for the same. So it is very evident that that time central government or parliament couldn't take any action or have any acts and policies related to it. Because of which, in the year 1976, 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act, two new articles were added related to forest and wildlife, 48A and 51A. The 48A was a part of DPSP and 51A was a part of fundamental duties. One more thing, before 1972 Act came, there was 5 national parks, and now after this Conservation Act and different amendments, there are 500 national parks available. Let's see the Wildlife Protection Act, a little bit of overview. This is known as Act 53 of 1972, enacted by Parliament in 9 September 1972. First landmark legislative action taken for the basic conservation and protection of wild animals, birds and plants, amended 6 times. The last time was 2008, which is also known as Amendment of 2006. Amendment of 2002, penalty and punishment became more stringent, and in Amendment 2006, National Tiger Conservation Authority and Wildlife Crime Control Bureau was created. Wildlife Crime Control Bureau was created for tiger and other endangered species. Both these two committees were statutory bodies. Now, as far the Wildlife Protection Act is concerned, here there are 6 schedules which gives various degrees of protection and various degrees of punishments as well. There are different sections in this act. Section 2 describes the definition of what is wildlife, what is hunting, what is vermin, and different other definitions. Section 9 talks about hunting. Section 40 and 42 talks about the ownership, and 51 talks about the penalties. In this Wildlife Act, taxidermy is also prohibited. Now, what is taxidermy? That is curing, preparation and preservation of trophies by cutting the animals or their different body parts. Collecting different animals and animals' body parts which are uncured, as in which are freshly killed animals, freshly killed birds. Those are also prohibited because of this act. Now let's see the constitutional provision. In 1976, 42nd Constitutional Amendment came. There are 3 changes which has happened. One is Article 256, where this wildlife conservation or protection came from state list to the concurrent list, so that the central government can take into action as well. Article 51A, sub-article G, where it would be the fundamental duty for every citizen to protect and improve the natural environment, including forest and wildlife, and Article number 48A, which would mandate that the state shall endeavour to protect and improve the environment and safeguard the forest and wildlife of the country. Now, as we mentioned that this Wildlife Protection Act has 6 schedules, so now we will see all the schedules and the animals and other species covered in it. The first 2 schedules are the most important, because these 2 schedules provide the absolute protection, and offences under this are prescribed the highest penalties. Now, what can be the penalties? The penalties are 3 to 7 years imprisonment and 10,000 rupees fine. And if that is subsequently repeated, then it would be minimum 3 years of imprisonment and fine for 25,000. This imprisonment can increase up to 7 years. The species which comes under Schedule 1, that is cheetah, fishing cat, Gangetic dolphin, chinkara, clouded leopard, Indian elephants, etc. The pictures shown here are fishing cats, chinkara, and in the newspaper article, that is Gangetic dolphin. Fishing cat is important for us because it's also the state animal of West Bengal. Chinkara is important because it is also considered as very, very auspicious to a particular tribe called Bisnoi in Rajasthan. So you cannot kill the chinkaras over there, they would protest. And in the newspaper cutting, the Gangetic dolphin, I have put it because this is the cutting of April 23rd. During lockdown, as the pollution of Ganga has lessened a lot, because of that in the ghats of Kolkata, a lot of viewers could see the Gangetic dolphins, which are also into the extinct category. Now the species which comes under Schedule 2 are Bengal porcupine, wild dog or dhole, flying squirrels, king cobra, rhesus macaque, etc. The pictures are of dhole, flying squirrel and rhesus macaque. Now this rhesus macaque is also considered as vermin. What is vermin? We will come to see into the later slides. Now let's see the animals of Schedule 3 and Schedule 4. The species under both Schedule 3 and Schedule 4 are also protected, but the penalties are much lower as compared to Schedule 1 and Schedule 2. The species which comes under Schedule 3 are nilgai, sambar, wild pig, etc. The pictures are of all of these three is given here. The species which comes under Schedule 4 are cranes, cuckoos, barn owls, etc. Here also the pictures has been given. Now Wildlife Protection Act Schedule 5 and 6. Schedule 5 includes animals which can be hunted. Those are common crow, fruit bat, mice and rat. We are pretty familiar with crow and mice and rat. Fruit bat is the picture I've given over here. Fruit bat is also known as mega bat because these are pretty big compared to other bats and they only have fruit juices. Schedule 6 basically contains the plants. From Schedule 1 to Schedule 5, there are different species other than animals. For example, insects, fishes, reptiles, etc. But Schedule 6 only contains the plants. These plants are prohibited from cultivation and planting. The plants are Bedomis seasad, blue vanda, couth, ladies sleeper orchids, peacher plant and red vanda. The pictures I have put here, from left to right in the downside we will see Bedomis seasad, blue vanda, couth and ladies sleeper orchid, and in the upper side from the down to the up there are peacher plant and red vanda as well. Now generally these plants are very rare and those we would be able to find mostly in the mountains only. Blue vanda is found in Assam Khasi Hills. Seaside Bedome found in small area in Andhra Pradesh in Tirumala Hills. Couth found in elevation of 2,500 meters to 3,000 meters. Lady sleeper orchids are found in Tehri Garhwal region, and peacher plants are found in Khasi region, and red vanda found in eastern Himalaya. Now here comes the concept of vermin. What is vermin? Vermins are pests and nuisance animals that spread diseases, destroy crops or livestock. This vermin term is defined in relation to human activities only. These vermins vary from area to area and person to person. If a particular animal or other species is considered in a particular state or territory in India, not necessarily that would be considered in other state. For example, nilgai has been declared as vermin most of the time in Bihar, but that is not considered as vermin in Gujarat. Monkeys declared vermin in Himachal and Uttarakhand most of the time because these animals create the maximum nuisance over there. As you can see, the news article, uh, the news cutting of DNA, that was declared vermin in Himachal third time since 2016, and the article was of March 3rd, 2019. As per Section 62 of the Wildlife Protection Act 1972, states can send a list of wild animals to the center requesting it to declare them vermin for selective slaughter or culling. Now, there's another news on May, which is current one, that on May 3rd, 2020, the Assam government confirmed that more than 2,500 pigs in 300 villages were killed due to African swine flu in Assam. And the reason was confirmed by the National Institute of High Security Animal Diseases, or NIHSAD, of Bhopal. Central government declared pigs as vermin to cull them, but the state government was still trying to find alternative measure to save them before culling. Now, when the vermin is declared, the protection gets removed, but you cannot declare Schedule 1 species as vermin. Otherwise, any other schedule species can be declared as vermin as well. Also, vermin depends on the state and territory, which I mentioned before. Now, we will see the National Wildlife Action Plan. Now, what is National Wildlife Action Plan? That is, it's an action plan to conserve wildlife of the country. So far, 3 wildlife plans has been launched. The first one was from 1983 to 2001. The second one was from 2002 to 2016. The third one was from 2017 to 2031. The unveiling of the third National Wildlife Plan has been put as a screenshot in the right hand side of the slide. Now, this third wildlife action plan was launched by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, and this launch was done by the respective minister, Mr. Harshvardhan. It was actually initiated on February 2016, but it was launched on 2017. It was drafted by 12-member committee headed by J.C. Kala. J.C. Kala was the former Director of General of Forest under Government of India. At that point of time, he was a current Director of General, and also that time he was also the Secretary of the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Now, what is National Wildlife Action Plan? Some facts are: this third wildlife action plan is very unique because this is the first time India has recognized the concerns relating to climate change and how it can impact on wildlife, and it has also stressed on integrating actions that needs to be taken for its mitigation. That means mitigation of the climate change into wildlife management planning process. It has 5 components which we will be discussing. It also has 103 conservation actions, 250 projects. It follows landscape approach. Now, what is landscape approach? That is, uncultivated flora or undomesticated fauna which has an ecological value to the ecosystem or mankind, it would be conserved irrespective of wherever that occurs. So the landscape it's not important for conservation of the flora and fauna which are related to the wildlife, as in the flora which would be uncultivated and the fauna which would be undomesticated. So those are wild. So the place wherever that occurs, it doesn't matter if that is important to the environment and mankind, that would be conserved, that would be protected. So this is called the landscape approach, and this is unique to this third action plan because in the previous two this approach was not taken at that point of time. This action plan is impacting 5% of the land area. Now, what are the 5 components over here? The 5 components are: 1. Strengthening and promoting the integrated management of wildlife and their habitats. 2. Adaptation to climate change and promoting integrated sustainable management of aquatic biodiversity in India. 3. Promoting ecotourism, nature education and participatory management. 4. Strengthening wildlife research and mentoring of the development of human resources in wildlife conservation. And 5. Enabling policies and resources for conservation of wildlife in India. Now we will see the National Wildlife Action Plan key features. The key features are: 1. Climate change. 2. Marine ecosystem. 3. Human-animal conflicts. 4. People support. And 5th, private sector participation. Now what is climate change? The key feature as far the climate change is concerned is integrating climate change into wildlife management, planning process and recovery of threatened species of wildlife through habitat preservation. As I mentioned that in this time, for the first time, climate change and effect of climate change into the wildlife and how we can mitigate the climate change for the preservation was taken into account. Second one is marine ecosystem, which is conservation of wildlife habitats in marine, coastal and inland aquatic ecosystem. Third one was human-animal conflict, that is issues of fragmentation and shrinkage in habitats which results in human conflict per se, human-animal conflict. Fourth was people support, which was importance of people support for the conservation of life. So we have to educate people and we have to have the support for the conservation, which was also mentioned in the fundamental duty, that is 51A, that it is responsibility of the citizen. And also private sector participation. Now private sector participation, all the private sector and the people, the organizations, they can contribute and they can conserve the wildlife by their corporate social funds. So these are all the key features of the National Wildlife Action Plan. So this is where we are coming into the conclusion, and this was all about the National Wildlife Protection Act 1972 and National Wildlife Action Plan. I thank you all.